God King, Chapter 11, Physician. The first word from the great house was that the marriage had been postponed. Pharaoh was ill and under the care of his physician, but the people were not to be disturbed. The ceremony would be held soon. They can't keep this up forever, thought Taharka. They've gotten themselves into a trap. When the army arrives from Cush, but when that would be was uncertain. Amos's money bag was getting flat. Amos himself was strangely silent. He seemed wrapped in his own thoughts. "What will you do?" said Taharka. "Will you go home? You came here on a mission. You've done what you could." And whatever else, Amos's mission seemed to have been a success. Preparations for the war against the Assyrians seemed to be proceeding. Men were being called up from the villages and the great estates, 2 out of every 10, as Taharka himself had commanded. The temple troops, the treasury troops, the mercenaries were marched out into the desert for the rigorous training under the blazing sun. The streets were seldom without the sound of a drum and the sight of a squad of men. But Amos said only, "My mission has been interrupted. I will stay a while." "It's because of me," thought Taharka. "He's waiting to see what will happen to me. Why does he care?" "What will happen to me?" And he answered himself, "When the army arrives from Cush, it will be over. They will find the traitors, and I will be back in the great house, safe. No worry about gold rings and bags of beans." And then the unthinkable. What if it never happens? What if this were all that was left to me? What would I do? Strangely enough, it was Talos, returning from the markets, who provided an answer. He settled his packs, talking softly to himself, a habit of men who traveled and lived alone. "Poor Baku." "Who's Baku?" "A man I met down on the docks. He's a physician there, to the longshoremen. Not much money, but it's a living. Only now his apprentice has been conscripted. He doesn't know where he's going to find anyone else. Down on his luck with a scribe school education." Very slowly, Taharka sat up. His eyes were very wide. Down on his luck with a scribe school education? "Where is this man?" he asked. "You have read the papyrus on the heart surgery and the blood? You have read the papyrus on surgery?" "I have studied them at scribe school in Cush," Taharka answered honestly. "I'm not sure how much I remember." The little brown man with the shaved head and the linen kilt studied him closely. "That doesn't concern me," he said. "You would only assist me, always under my direction at first. You would study at night, of course. You would memorize all the incantations, the prescriptions." There was a long silence. Taharka glanced around the whitewashed room with its basins and instruments. His heart was beating very fast. Outside, he could hear all the hurry and bustle of the docks. He could hear all the wash of the river against the boats, the flapping of sails, the shouts of foremen. "Very well," said the man at last. "We will try you." Next day, a man came in with a toothache. Baku tested his apprentice. "What poultice will bring down the swelling?" And Taharka, searching his mind from his studies of the night before, rattled off the formula. "Mix it," said Baku. A woman, the wife of one of the foremen, came in very upset. She had only 3 children, she said, and already her hair was turning gray. Taharka looked through the papyrus on cosmetics, mixed a rinse, and sold it to her with instructions on how to apply it at home. Then he was left alone in the surgery. A man had been injured on one of the boats from Memphis and could not be moved, and Baku had been called to the scene. As Taharka was using the time to brush up on a certain magic formula that had baffled him, another man was carried into the room, bloody and moaning with pain and fear. An emergency! What was he to do? but it might have been the boatman on that long-ago crocodile hunt, the same wound, but gotten in a knife fight, not from the teeth of Sebek. And here everything was at hand, the splints, clean cloths, needles, and threads to sew the wound. The man went out on his feet, bowing and smiling, uttering his thanks and his relief. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you, doctor." Doctor? Taharka, who had been called a god, stood, smiling foolishly in amazed self-satisfaction. He ambled home that night in a haze of good feeling, humming a tune to himself. It was a love song, but that reminded him of Shepneset, so he switched to one of the sailors' chants he had heard on the docks. At a corner, he collided with a man who seemed to be waiting for someone. It was Taharka's fault. His mind had been on other things. "Sorry, are you all right?" The man bowed low, but not before Taharka had seen his face. The scar on it made it one that would be easily remembered. The man did not speak. After a moment, Taharka looked back. The man was gone. Whoever he was waiting for, he seemed to have found him. Chapter 12. Shabbataka, my brother. No word came from the great house. The people were disturbed. Pharaoh had not come out in the morning to bless the Nile. Where was the daily report? "They're hiding something. Is Pharaoh, the gods forbid, dead?" "It will happen soon," Amos muttered to himself. "It will have to happen soon." That evening, he returned to the house of Talos without his gold rings and bracelets, loaded down with sacks of barley and non-perishable foods, enough for a journey. "You're leaving?" said Taharka. Already he felt a strange, painful sense of loss. "No, not yet." He would say no more. And then the army arrived from Cush. Taharka, in Baku's surgery, first heard them in the distance. The drums, the rattling of the spears on the great Cushite shields. Already the earth seemed to shake to their sound. For a moment his heart stopped, then pulsed again to hear that majestic beat. "They're here! They're here!" And "They're here!" shouted a man, bursting into surgery. "They're massing outside the city. There's a whole contingent of them. It looks like thousands coming toward the docks." How had they come so soon? It was only 7 days since he had sent the message, and a horseman would take at least 15 days to reach Cush. Had they been waiting somewhere not too far from the city? For what? Why? Louder and louder. Yes, they were coming. A little boy, having a scraped knee treated, he had a nervous mother, suddenly slid off the table and ran to the door. Baku and Taharka looked at each other and, without words, followed his example. They were coming, line upon line of the tall black men of Cush in their linen kilts, their man-high shields covered with the skins of beasts. They marched along the docks, filing out to block off the quays. All but one, the great main pier where the official barges were moored. The people followed slowly, curious, unsure of what was happening, a little frightened. A few tried to follow onto the pier, but were held back by the spears. Taharka looked up. The tops of the houses nearby were swarming with people hoping for a better view, but this did not last long, for a soldier on horseback rode back and forth, shouting, "Into your houses! Clear the roofs on the pain of death!" "What is this?" whispered Baku. "What are they doing? Their general is coming by boat?" They left an opening at the end of the quay. Through the gap, Taharka saw a giant boat approaching. For a moment he thought it was the royal barge, but that could not be. No, it was indeed the barge of the general of the Cushite armies, but for some reason was fitted out with the royal standards, leafed in gold. A soft murmur, like a sigh, rose among the people as the barge was moored and a small guard of men assembled. A great chair, washed in gold and resting on cedar poles, was lifted to the shoulders of the 4 tall men of the far south. In it sat not a general, but a god. He wore the double crown of the north and south. He carried the golden wand. "On your knees!" The people obeyed, Taharka among them. A man, the crier, had come out upon the landing. He carried a papyrus scroll, which he slowly unrolled. "I will read to you the words of the god. Let them be proclaimed throughout the city. I, Shabbataka, son of the sun, great god of Cush, lord of the 2 lands, do hereby proclaim my kingdom. This day a great sacrilege has been averted. Blasphemers have dared to claim my holy office in the name of a pretender, and because of this, the Assyrians have risen in the east, and all manner of evil has come upon the land. Let this sacrilege be blotted out from memory. Let my divine rule be written from the day of my divine fathers going forth. I, Shabbataka, will cleanse the land of this blasphemy. I, Shabbataka, will lead you against the Assyrians, till there is not one left to rise against my majesty." "Let it be proclaimed." The man rolled up the papyrus and stepped back onto the barge. Silence hung over the quay, as still as the air itself. No cries, no cheers, no exclamations of wonder rose from the crowd. All that could be heard was the soft lap, lap of the river against the stones. "Shabbataka," thought Taharka. "Not the Assyrians. Shabbataka, my brother." The chair carriers, with their awesome burden, were moving onto the landing. They were coming closer. Taharka had only one thought. He would not abase himself here on the stones while his mortal enemy passed by. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his eyes on the radiant figure in the golden chair. There was a stirring among the soldiers, but they would not move as Pharaoh passed them. As it moved beyond him, the godlike figure turned its head. He saw Shabbataka's eyes widen in recognition. He realized what he had done. He was in grave danger. As the god passed, the people had risen behind him. Taharka moved back into the throng. He wanted to run, but knew this would be a fatal thing. He listened, his heart racing, for Shabbataka's shout of command, but heard nothing. His thoughts churned. Shabbataka had been surprised, he told himself. That was why there was no word of command. Back, farther into the crowd, till he was quite lost among them. The soldiers were moving now, spear points leveled, scanning the throng for the one who had dared stand on his feet before the god. But it was half-hearted, and all that shifting of men, women, and children, who could say which one it had been? Tonight it will be different, he thought. He knows now. He knows I am alive. He knows I am in the city. He knows I dared to face him. He will send men to search the houses in the district. I can't go back to Baku. And, with all the rest, one thought throbbed in his brain, a great grief rising to overwhelm him. Shabbataka. Shabbataka. I have lost my brother. I'm alone.